All right, Brooke, how's it going?
Conrad, happy Friday. We got a good, hopefully your kids are all excited for Easter weekend coming up here, right? You got like Easter egg hunts and stuff set up?
Absolutely. There's one tomorrow. And we were told on the little invitation, show promptly at 10 a.m. And what I think the subtext of that is if you show up at 10:05, all the Easter eggs will be gone because we're going to let the kids loose at 10 a.m. and they're going to go running around and picking up all the Easter eggs. So should be a
All
good
right.
time. I have fond memories of Easter.
So what's your favorite Easter candy?
So I like how they take these Reese's cups nowadays and they mold them into different shapes. So they
Yeah.
got like, for Halloween, they got little pumpkin ones, for Easter, they have like the egg shaped ones, if you will. Cause I think there's something fresher too about these Reese's peanut butter cups during these different seasonal type treats. So I love Reese's peanut butter cups. That'd be my vote there. How about you?
You stole my thunder. I'm always
Oh,
a
sorry.
Reese's peanut butter cup guy. Yep.
Yeah, you can't go wrong with them. I think there's something about them where they just like when they're newer like that, they just taste so much better. So a lot of good stuff there. But yeah, so I don't know how to pivot Easter and chocolate into JJ King. One more
Speaking of
time.
peanut butter cups,
Speaking of
maybe
sweet
maybe
things,
yeah.
there you go. There you go.
JJ is a very nice guy in my experience, so that does line up well. We were very conversational because obviously we all know each other and we got to work each other for some time. But we got JJ King in the podcast today. Excited about it. Brooke, what's the story here? I think you do have a fun one about connecting with JJ originally. Many people we've had on the show so far have been clients, but this one started a little bit differently. Started in a different type of relationship. So how did it begin?
Yeah. So I don't even know how many years ago it was, JJ, but it was I don't know, maybe 5 years ago, something like that. We just launched Vintory. We're crushing it. We're growing really fast. And then all of a sudden, I see this little punk kid creates this competing company called VRM Leads, and I'm like, oh shoot, and I looked at his website. It was a really slick looking website, and they were doing a lot of the same stuff we were doing. And I got a little concerned, but I learned from the industry, and reaching out to your competitors is usually a good thing to do. So actually extended an olive branch and reached out to them, and remember having a call with them and chat, and went all really well. We ended up becoming friends, and we kind of go back and forth and ask each other advice. And before you know it, he called me up one time and said, hey, would you consider buying me out? And looked under the hood a little bit, and I was really impressed with everything he'd done, and ended up buying VRM Leads. And JJ came on the team and was instrumental. Really did a lot of different things for Vintory. He was one of our account managers, one of our marketing strategists. Then he went over to product just because he was super smart and super sharp on that side of it. And it was a good partnership. And then by the way, and I'll let him tell the story. He started a little vacation rental company on the side, and obviously learned everything from Vintory, and really took that company off, and came to me one day and said, hey, Brooke, my company's up to like 400 properties or something stupid. I think I got to go work full time over there. So yeah, it was a crazy run. So JJ, what did I massacre on that story?
yeah, I'd say we haven't hit the 400 mark yet, but I think when I left Vintory, we were at 100 properties, and it was one of
Maybe
those
that was
where
it.
it was like, wow, this little side hustle is no longer a side hustle, and I really should be paying full attention to this company that we built. And so, yeah, that was when we had to unfortunately part our ways, but it was
I
a
don't.
great couple of years there at Vintory.
It's so funny because I don't think I knew like how big it was. This little side hustle. It was more of like, hey, I'm going to help a friend out. Launch. Is that all right? And I'm like, sure, no problem. And then next thing you know, like you said, it was a massive beast of a company.
I don't think either one of us could have anticipated that, if I'm being honest.
Nice. Well, JJ, for the listener, maybe they know a little bit of bits and pieces, kind of about the company and your background, what you're focused on today. But just for some context on their side, walk us through that a little bit. What's Beachside VR? What do you focus on today? How are things going?
Yeah, so Beachside VR is a short-term vacation rental property management company. We're located in the Space Coast of Florida. Our headquarters is in Cocoa Beach, and we manage all different kinds of properties, from little one-bedroom condos all the way up to large multi-unit complex resort style properties.
Right on. Awesome. And the inventory count today, you said it's not quite 400, but it's approaching
We
that.
are
Is that
right
a
around
fair?
300 right now, and growing pretty rapidly, signing up new properties almost every
Crazy.
day. So
The growth's been impressive.
He took everything he learned at being under the hood at Vintory and implemented it firsthand. So
Yeah.
obviously
it's the
works.
ultimate case study. Yeah, Brooke, it's the
Yes.
ultimate case study, right? Taking the principles and not just hearing them secondhand, but like actually living them and then going through and executing on those principles. And I'm sure you learned some new things since you started as well. So I think we're going to dive into that as we get going here for sure. All right. Well, if you're cool with it, JJ, let's do it. Let's dive right in. Number one, not one that I've seen much of. So this will be good to kind of start on this foot. So number one in your top 10 mistakes was not paying closer attention to owner billables. Once you better implemented systems to track things like purchases and billable maintenance, you found a lot of money. You said in the mistake here, tens of thousands of dollars a month that weren't being billed properly. Makes me sick to think of how much money we left on the table early on. But what's kind of the process look like today for owner billables? How'd you fix that? And what's the net effect been on the business since you've adjusted?
Yeah. So we partnered super early on in our business with Top Key, and it was actually we were kind of one of the early adopters of Top Key, and we were looking for an expense management tracking system, and it just kind of fit the bill perfect, and we were lucky enough to kind of help them build out the some of the systems and that sort of thing that we needed. But it has been so great because, like I said, before that we were not really sure. We had everything on one credit card, and then like you'd hand somebody the credit card, they'd go to the store, and then you didn't know what they bought, or they'd lose the receipt, something like that. Now in our process, every time somebody makes a purchase, it texts the employee who made that purchase, says, hey, what property was this for, attach a receipt for it, and then who is it, bill to owner, bill to corporate. And this happens for every transaction. And then after that, you'll get a list at the end of the month of all of the billables per property. And depending on your PMS integration, you can either push them right over to the owner statement, or manually load them in as owner charges. But that has been just crazy in the amount of stuff that I was just looking at kind of our billables over time. And before doing it, we had, like $100, $200 in billables a month. And then after, it's just thousands of billables in a month. That they're just little things that you don't think about of, you run to the hardware store and buy something, and like, it's not a big deal. It's $10, $20, whatever. And then before you know it, if you're doing that for 100 owners, it adds up very quickly.
Yeah, a shout out to the team over at Top Key. They built an incredible product that's solving a big problem in our industry. And I guarantee you, I lost tens and tens of thousands of dollars, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars every single year, because we were relying on some maintenance tech, you know what I mean, to your point, JJ, to like, borrow my credit card and go run to the store and get something. And I guarantee you, I saw his truck. He was not he was not very organized, gentleman. And I guarantee he wasn't doing any kind of expense reports on that. It was end up just getting eaten. We just ended up eating it. So these kind of solutions are definitely solving a big problem out there.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's one of those things. I felt this way a few years or a few times over the years, where you see a tool and you go like, why didn't that exist before? That's why I felt when I've seen this Top Key thing explained. It's not a pain point that I've had necessarily with my business, but I totally see where like, yep, that makes complete sense. Felt the same way about Breezeway when I first saw it. I'm like, oh, like there's not anything that really exists like this, and they're like, no, like they had to build it from scratch and build this. Now it's very critical to a lot of our clients that we work with as well, using that for maintaining the property and stuff like that. So yeah, it's it's so funny how those things just kind of leak out of the business, right, JJ? And it's good to see that you kind of plug that leak, and I think a lot of people can learn from that as a system and a process goes, for sure.
Yeah.
Right on. Well, number two is more on the people side, the team side. So number two you mentioned here was having people in the wrong seats. So as Steve Trevor likes to say, you need to have the right people in the right seats. And maybe you had some people early on that weren't in the right seats. What was kind of the adjustment? How'd you end up finding? Was it reassigning people in your organization to other roles, or was it eventually moving on from some people? Or were the changes that you made to get people more aligned with what they needed to be doing in the company?
Yeah, it was a mix of both. So we've been lucky enough to be able to move some people around, and that, like I said, is just kind of a night and day difference in seeing people who are clearly struggling in their role, and you almost kind of as a manager start thinking like, does this person even like their job? Are they are they happy to be here? But then you realize they're not happy if they're not doing things, they're not playing to their strengths. And as soon as you can move somebody to play to their strengths, then they're going to become a lot more happy as an employee. And I'll give an example: is our owner relations manager, who early on she was doing a lot more like task-based, admin-based work, and things that required like a lot of attention to detail. And then we kind of realized that she's a much more social person and really thrives in social environments. And so we shifted her into owner relations. And now she gets to talk to owners all day. She spends the majority of the day talking to people on video calls, phone calls, that sort of thing. And she loves it. So it's definitely a, kind of a shift there. And we used predictive index. I know, Brooke, you're a big culture index person, and I think they're pretty similar in that regard of just seeing where your true personality, kind of like the way that you're wired, is comes out in those tests. And everybody on our team that's taken them have been like, that's kind of scary. Like, how does it know that about me? And so yeah, that's been a huge one for us, is just kind of trying to find people who are either aren't a good fit for the role, or of course screening ahead of time and making sure that they're going to be a good fit before placing them in that role too.
Yeah, Conrad, I don't think there's too much to add to this one. We talked about this, I think, just about every other podcast. So, yeah, I mean, we're big believers in it. And I don't care either. Culture index, predictive index, as long as you use something just to make sure you're getting that right person in the right seats.
Yeah, I think the joke that we have is that EOS owes us a commission, the traction, book and the EOS thing, and then this one does as well because it's mentioned a lot. But maybe it's good, reinforcement too for folks listening, right? To say like, I'm not doing this. Maybe this is the time that nudges someone over the edge. Hearing JJ's kind of thought process and how he was able to reassign someone, because I've had that happen before too. Someone who was like, wow, like thought we were on the right track, and then it felt like we weren't, and then we got that person in a different role, and then all of a sudden things got better. No one wants to have to let people go, like we talked about. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, CJ at Southern Comfort Capital Rentals, he did that. He realized he had two people in totally wrong seats, so he just swapped them, and he was ready to fire both of them. He swapped them, and they both flourished in their right roles. They were just literally in the wrong seats, but it wasn't apparent until he did one of these psychometric personality assessments.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, number 3 then, JJ, going back that direction, is kind of maybe a similar thing. It's more on the team side, but maybe more on the decision-making side of when to hire people. So number 3, hiring positions, because quote unquote, that's what growing companies do. At some point, maybe you found yourself actually an overstaff, environment, which led to less productivity. You had directors for departments that maybe didn't need it. What's kind of the right balance that you found here as far as staffing and maybe finding the right people that you need, back to the last point, but also hiring when needed and not over hiring, maybe, which is something you were trying before.
Yeah, I think that's such a hard thing to come up with as a growing company, because there's not a super clear blueprint. And especially in our industry, I don't think there's a super clear blueprint on different positions, different departments. Everybody's a little bit structured differently there. So yeah, I think we found, we kind of thought as we were growing that we needed department heads and directors at different levels and that sort of thing. And then as we've grown, we've realized if you have competent employees that are kind of on the front line, you don't necessarily need somebody to manage that department as much as you need somebody just to manage kind of the whole company. And so that's what's been working for us, is not having these kind of like middle manager level type people, and just saying, here's the top manager, and then here's the department, and everybody in that department is capable of making decisions to a certain extent. And if they need something, larger decision, then they can go up to the top level manager. So yeah, kind of just like I said, what we've learned has been that middle manager level sometimes can end up being a little bit of a fluffy job, where you think that person's really busy doing a lot of things, and then as it turns out, they've already delegated most of what they were doing to somebody else. And so yeah, that's what we found, and so far it's been working for us as we've kind of shifted.
Conrad, I think we talked about this. I'm actually going to do either a newsletter or a blog. I haven't figured out what kind, or maybe even like an interactive web page where it shows like the kind of the ideal scenario. And there's not one size fits all, but like at different stages, when do you hire different roles? So from, call it 1 to 20 properties, what does your company look like? From maybe 20 to, 50, 50 to 100, 100 to 200, and so on. Like, when do you start hiring those people and layering them in? But what I actually want to do is I want to start surveying people. So JJ, I'd love to get some feedback from you on that, and talk to a bunch of different other, vacation rental management companies on how did they do it? And then second, if you could go back in time and do it differently, what would it look like? And I'll publish those results. I think that'll be really helpful for the community.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And Brooke, I'm pretty sure this is something that I learned from you about structuring out, kind of like your ideal org chart, even
Yep.
if you're the name that's on, 5 of those different positions, and then slowly, taking your name off of some of those different positions. And I mean, we still have it that way, even though we have grown to be, kind of a mid-sized company, that there's still people that have their name on 2 or 3, quote, positions that, maybe someday we'll have somebody doing that full time, but for now that person's, technically doing two
Yeah.
responsibilities. So yeah.
Yeah, that came from, and I'm glad you brought that up, JJ. That came from eMyth, and the way eMyth describes it is like get a post-it note and draw out get a bunch of post-it notes and build out your org chart. Think of it like 5 years, 10 years into the future, and what does it look like, and have all the roles laid out there, and your name is going to be on many of those positions. But again, exactly what you said. Over time, you're slowly taking your name off of those post-it notes and putting somebody else's. You still may have 3, 4, 5, but over time, again, it gets back to, as it scales, ideally you end up going, maybe 1 or 2. But that's a great plug for the eMyth, which is a fantastic. I think every small business entrepreneur needs to read that. It should be required reading out there.
Yeah. My specific context, Brooke, to your point there, is all about the marketing side of it. And I think the one mistake I see over and over again is someone hiring for marketing. Maybe they've got to a certain revenue stage or a certain property count where they go, awesome, I'm now going to, hire someone for marketing in-house. But then they think that person can do everything. So they say, okay, well, instead of using outside contractors, agencies, whatever the model happens to be, I'm going to hire one person. That one person is going to be an expert in paid search and SEO and email marketing and social media and everything. And then, what I unfortunately see over and over again is these companies getting disappointed by that person because no one person, myself included, even though that's what, my whole agency provides, can do all those things at a very high level. Maybe they can do a few of those things at a high level if you found someone really talented, but not everything. So then they need to realize that they can hire someone for marketing at some point, but they're still going to have that person outsourcing. But maybe their outsourcing budget can go down significantly. They need more specialists for 1 or 2 roles, not someone, not a bigger engagement or a bigger scope with an agency that's doing 5 or 7 things. So that's kind of been my experience there. And
Yeah.
it's frustrating when I see it happen over and over again. And I just want to prevent people from making that mistake because they end up disappointed. And then it, kind of slows them down a little bit. It's almost like an anchor around their neck. They're not actually getting the marketing results they want. So yeah. That's been that side of it. So yeah, number 4, JJ, kind of going back to the owner side, I feel like the way you worded this is, this topic's come up a few times, but the way you worded it, I think is really solid. Not listening to your gut, not paying attention to your gut feeling when you have an owner, for example, during the sales process, you feel like that's always going to end badly. So if you're getting the wrong energy, the wrong vibes from an owner, probably best to address those concerns head on, and maybe even not the right fit for your program. Even if the property maybe is the right fit, they might not be the right fit. So what's kind of the process here, and how often are you kind of working through those problems now and saying no when you need to an owner?
Yeah, we've gotten a lot more selective as we've grown, which is good. And we've just kind of seen that 80-20 rule play out of all the time. There's always a couple of properties that are going to be the most work, and trying to pinpoint those before we even go through the effort of onboarding it. But yeah, there's always a couple of red flags um, in the sales process that we found, and typically it revolves around the owner trying to negotiate the contract. That is one where it's always like, unless there's a very good reason for it, it's probably this owner is going to be a difficult person to work with. And so, most of the time we don't do any type of negotiations or anything on the contract. And a lot of times the owners will come back and be like, okay, sounds good. And they just wanted to see, if they could push anything. But yeah, we've had a couple where in hindsight it's like, well, we had problems in the sales process, and then, of course you get onboarded, and then there's problems, and then they churn like a month into being onboarded. And it's like, we could have just avoided that whole drama if we would have just stuck to the gut feeling in the early processes and known that this is going to be a hard person to work with.
That's a great point. What are those tells, right? I guess you could do almost like a regression analysis on your bad owners. Were there any tells in the early stages? And like you said, over negotiating the contract is probably a great sign.
Yeah,
There
if
used to
they
be
come back
something.
with a red line of the whole contract is, I've never seen that go well
Yeah.
in our business, at least. So
It's so. I'm going to date myself. When I first started, I remember, my biggest competitor actually had. They had like the triple ply, like like the management contracts. They were all pre-printed and everything else. They would just carbon copy, literally. And the benefit to that for them is they wouldn't you couldn't make any changes. We would just do it on Word, obviously, and change it, if we had to. But it was negotiable for them. They were like, we can't negotiate. These are all pre-printed. You can't change anything, in there. So there's something to be said about that.
Yeah. Like,
Carbon
sorry, like,
go back. Let's go back to carbon copies.
Yeah, nothing you can do about it. JJ, I'm curious. I have a follow up here, and this is something that I've struggled with. So I'm curious how you guys have handled this. And maybe this isn't the case, but are the people who are selling your contracts in your company, whether it's I think you have a co-founder who I've met a few times, and maybe there's other people now at this point selling. Are they motivated? Or are they partially commissioned for selling those homeowner contracts, or is that something that's not your model?
Right now, we don't have a individual salesperson, so
Okay.
so it's just Riley, my co-founder, that's doing the sales part of it. So of course he's motivated to sign a contract. However, he's also the one that's responsible when there's issues with the contract. So yeah, I think that is an interesting point though. If you have a salesperson who's motivated to close more deals and they're compensated based on that, how do you keep them from being selective with inventory, right? Because we had just mentioned that of the 80-20 rule, and we kind of know like some complexes that we don't want to work in because it's not going to get rented, or they have a difficult leasing process or whatever the case may be. We've kind of have this internal rule of like, yeah, let's not sign any places in these areas. But I don't know how you do that with a salesperson who would be motivated. They want the extra revenue for signing those. So yeah, that is a kind of difficult line to cross.
Yeah. And frankly, that's been my battle, right? Sorry, Brooke. Like, when someone's motivated on a commission, when I go in and spike it, not due to like a very black and white reason, like wrong building or wrong location, that's obviously not my problem. But I'm just like, yeah, not getting good vibes here. Like, then I'm the bad guy because I went and spiked the deal and was like, no, I don't want to do it. And then they're like, oh, you just took, X dollars out of my pocket. It's really hard to navigate those things. So I don't know, Brooke, if you had experiences like that too. But
yeah, well, just in the early days, we actually had kind of almost like a self-policing system where we didn't have dedicated roles. You didn't do just business development. You're scrappy in the early days. So when you signed up a property and that property owner, you owned the relationship with that owner. So it was almost like your book of business. So you sign him up or her up. You would manage that. If the owner was wanted questions, wanted to adjust rates, they reached out to you. If there was issues or damage to the property or issues with even the hot water heater and things like that, that property manager, if you will, was that relation person. So it did act as almost like a self-policing because you didn't want to sign up some jerk, you know what I mean? Because you had to deal with them. Now, as we grew and as we scaled, that changed. We did get into, specialization where you were just doing business development and then you handed it off to the other person who was more of that property manager and they had to deal with it. So you probably would be a little bit more likely to like let one slide through, if you knew you didn't have to kind of sweep up behind them.
Yeah,
that's a super interesting point. I never even thought of that, to have owner relations and business development tied together, because then you like you said, you have to deal with the issues of who you signed up. So it's still your problem.
Forced. Yeah. The problem is it's not, if going back to the psychometric personality assessments, like it's probably not the best use of their role. Like usually a really good salesperson is awful on follow-up and they're not going to do really, really well at like those tasks where you need to be on top of it. And remember, an owner calls you up and says, hey, I need to, whatever, I need to get some work done on the property. Make sure you block off the calendar or whatever it happens to be. Like, that business development person forgets that. That's it's not going to bode well. So again, you want to have complementary skill sets, based on their profiles and based on the roles.
Yeah. Yeah. I think JJ, obviously it seems like you'll get there down the road close enough. And I admit it's been a bit of a challenge for me. So maybe it's something we can come back and revisit down the road. How do you, be fair to the person on the sales side who's, earning on commission, but also you're spiking it again, not based on like objective criteria, like again, location or bedroom count or those types of things, but you're spiking based on like not a good fit for, our company. And that's always been tough conversations for me to have. So maybe we'll come back to that one down the road. go from there. So number 5, number 6 here, JJ, kind of related in a way. Maybe we can almost combine them to some respect. It's all about the software side of the business and the software contracts that you've signed. So number 5, just for the benefit of the listener, is not reading the software contracts really closely or not negotiating for more favorable terms. And then number 6 talks about signing up for maybe too many softwares and having maybe some overlapping functionality, some fragmentation in the business. So what's kind of your process today? If you were to go sign up for a new software tool, how do you know if it's actually worth it? And then how do you negotiate with these software vendors to get a better rate or a better deal for you on your side of things?
JJ, you're killing me, man. Come on. You're supposed to be on my side here.
Both of us,
well,
bro.
and
Right? I
so
don't want
I
anyone
will
negotiating.
preface too, some things aren't negotiable, but it's
Thank
always
you.
worth trying to negotiate. And I think as you get to be a larger company, you get a little bit more sway in negotiation because your budget's also bigger. So, you have a little bit more wiggle room there. But yeah, especially early on, like nobody would take us seriously, and there was no negotiation power. But yeah, that's just something that there knowing what you're signing up for, I think, especially with your property management system, is really important, and just understanding the fees. Um, we had in one of our property management system, we've been on 3 different systems over the years, but on one of them, one or maybe multiple, we were unaware that we were being charged a transaction fee per credit card transaction, like on top of the credit card transaction. And I mean, it's clearly stated in the contract, but it was just one of those things, you got the contract and you signed it, you didn't fully read through it because it wasn't talked about in the sales process. And we were like, okay, we're going to pay X amount per listing per month, and that's it. But in all reality, the processing fee was more than the amount per month that you're paying per listing. So it's things like that might be buried in the contract, and if you're really not digging super deep into your financials, that you're kind of not noticing some of those things. So that was a pretty costly mistake that we had, that we have since negotiated differently.
Mm-hmm.
Look, here's my thing. Like, I don't read these things either. You know what I mean? It's all legalese. I mean, so the hack I've been doing personally, we sign up as, I just copy and paste them and put them into ChatGPT. Say, explain this to me like I'm a 4th grader. Anything I need to look out for, and it has pulled some things in there. Sometimes they address it, sometimes they don't. So
I just did that exact same thing, Brooke. I had a new vendor that we're vetting, and it's a new vendor who doesn't have many clients, so they're also kind of working through their contract. And I did the same thing. I put it into chat and said, is this one-sided against me? And if so, what what should I have it change? And had it craft me an email response back, because it was a long agreement. I mean, it was like 20
yeah.
pages or something. So yeah, that's a great hack.
Yeah. So the follow up there, JJ, how do you know when it is time? You mentioned you were signing up for a new software vendor or a vendor of some kind, it sounds like. How do you know when it is time to like split out and get new software? It sounds like maybe at some point you had tools that have overlapping functionality. So even if the pricing is right, even if you're getting a good deal, doesn't mean that tool is necessarily required for you and your business. How have you kind of built a more optimal tech stack over time?
Yeah, I'm probably the worst person about this, because I definitely have shiny object syndrome. And if there's a new feature that, one of my current techs don't have and the new one does, I'll convince myself that we need it. But I think I've gotten better in the past couple of years with this, just because I've seen the impact on my team. And, for me, adding another software to my daily routine, or, what I'm in daily, is not much of an issue, because I enjoy technology and I like spending time there. But however, not everybody enjoys technology, and not everybody uh, learns technology super quickly. So I've definitely taken that into account when we are making decisions. And yeah, I think it's just hard because there's so many things that have some overlap. Well, you mentioned Breezeway earlier, right? So technically all PMS systems also have a task
Yep.
management functionality in them, right? So you can create cleaning tasks from your PMS. However, sometimes it's lacking in certain functionalities there. And so you'll add on a system like Breezeway. Well, it's the same for a ton of other different parts of your business where, yes, you could send out marketing emails from your PMS, but then, you can't do all of the other stuff about it. So now you get a marketing email platform to handle that. And then oh, it looks like your marketing email platform could also do task management. Do you use task management there? Do you use it in your other system? So there's a lot of things like that where you signed up for this software for one reason, but then there's kind of it's got a couple other functionalities that your other softwares have, and then you're not sure which one to use. And yeah, I don't have a good answer for it other than I always try now to really check all of our um, text that we have now and see, if I have a new need, see if any of the current tech stack can solve it. And if it can, why am I not using that? And then if I have a good reason not to, then look at another solution.
I will, as a software supplier, I will defend some of these software people. If it makes you more productive, if it makes you more efficient, and if it ultimately saves you money, and you don't need to hire as many people, then it's worth it. I can't tell you how many times you're like, oh my God, I can't afford one more software. Well, if it say, people are the most expensive expense you have on your team is those people walking around on 2 feet. You know what I mean? And they suck up your revenue, and they're very, very expensive. And if you can replace a couple people with some technology, it is the greatest ROI you will have. But to your point, JJ, like, you have to actually, use it. And very often most people only use a very small portion of the softwares that they have. Or, like you said, most PMSs have all the ability. They can do a lot of the things that these the specialized ones do. It just does it make you more efficient by having one of these super apps, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's very well said. And I think probably what you're thinking or what you're seeing there, JJ, is kind of what I've seen a little bit over the years with our clients, is that these softwares are trying to lower their churn rate. So they feel like, well, if I build out more functionality or if I have something new, that's going to help someone be more, dialed into my software, my process. If I sit here and just only go in my lane and then someone else copies me, like the PMS being the most obvious example, is copying functionality from a more specialized software, then the property manager might think, well, the PMS is kind of the way that I've described it on the other podcast I do is like the PMS is the spinal cord of the vacation rental body, if that makes any sense. And that's like the one thing you really need. Everything else is nice to have. Like, it's nice to have a leg or an arm or, whatever, these other things, but you can cut one of those off and survive. You can't really cut the PMS and survive. So I think that is why that's such a sticky part of the business. And that's why I think you have to, if you're in that world, you're like trying to figure out how can I make sure that I am providing more value so that I don't lose customers and the PMS doesn't kind of swallow me up and swallow my clients up as well. So at least that's kind of been my feeling. So yeah. Number 7, then moving along here, JJ, more on the people side again, because so kind of going back to the team and those elements there, not installing or not putting in place quarterly evals of employees earlier. Always afraid to have that hard conversation, but in reality, once you had the conversation, it made everyone closer, stronger. So you mentioned earlier hiring the right people. Walk me through kind of managing those people and doing these regular reviews of them. How do you kind of handle that today? How's that worked in your favor?
Yeah, the quarterly evaluations have been great. When we first rolled them out, I just was not looking forward to a couple of them because we had rated their quarterly evaluation a little bit lower. It wasn't terrible, but it was, there's room for improvement, that kind of thing. And I just was not looking forward to presenting that information. And it didn't. It wasn't the end of the world. It actually went well. The employees that we delivered that information to agreed, and they were like, yeah, I think you're right. I can improve in these sections. And I think it's one of those things on I accountability, and making sure that it's clearly communicated of what you're expecting, because sometimes it's pretty easy to get uh, confused for the employee and the manager. You have two different visions, and if you're not having this expectations call of saying like, hey, here's what I think you should be doing, or here's how I think you're doing, you could be way off on one person's, like, the employee is thinking, wow, I'm doing great, I think I deserve a raise, and you as a manager, like, you're not even performing to the baseline standards, or vice versa. It could be the other way around too. I actually have a couple of employees who beat themselves up way too much on things, and I'm like, you're doing great, and they're like, oh, I didn't think I did well on this. So yeah, I think that's just helped us with alignment and making sure that we're all on the same page, and um, holding everybody accountable.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's hard. It's an easy thing to skip. And the process that I've always thought over my time frame, JJ, running, what I run on my side of things is always just like, they know that I appreciate them, right? They know that, I have good things to say about them, right? But then, yeah, you go and do that review of like that more one-on-one conversation, and then same kind of thing. That's been more my issue too. Me not praising or giving that positive feedback. It's like, yeah, we're good, right? And it's like, no, they don't know that. So going and saying it is actually, I like it, walking out a lot of those and like feeling like that was awesome. Like that person now knows how I feel, which is usually pretty positive. And if not, then those people don't last long anyways, right? If they're not delivering, that's kind of a little bit more obvious, at least in my organization. So, yeah. All right, number 8 here. This is a big one, so I'm very bullish on kind of hearing your thoughts here, JJ. Now, proactively communicating with owners. So, one point, you're only calling owners of bad news or to answer questions, and the owner statements are just kind of getting sent out, but maybe there's not that proactive relationship kind of going on there. So, what's this kind of look like in your business today? How do you reach out to owners and share all the news, good and bad, and how does that relationship evolve on the owner side over time?
Yeah, so this is an ongoing thing for us, but we've got, like I mentioned earlier, we have a dedicated owner relations manager now, and that's what she's doing all day, every day, is just booking calls with owners and just chit chatting them up, and trying to give them good news of, hey, revenue's up, or we just look at all these tasks that we just did at your property, and we didn't charge you for some of these things, and that kind of thing. Try to give them good news so that then when you do inevitably call and say, hey, like this pipe burst and we got to repair this pipe and we had to cancel these guests and whatever, at least that's not the first time that they're hearing from you in 6 months. So that's one. And then, we've been doing an owner newsletter. So, hey, we hired a new person on the team. This is the new person on the team, or we've signed new properties. Check out these other new properties that we've signed. And of course, any other kind of like announcement type of things. But yeah, we've definitely realized that over time that's the owners are kind of the most important part of the business, because without the owners, you don't have any inventory, and you don't have a business. So we definitely try and treat our owners well, and try and make sure that we're communicating with them a lot more than just, like I said, the kind of reactive communication that you tend to get into in the business.
JJ, this is so good. I mean, I can't tell you, I can't believe people don't do this more often, because building up those relationships with those owners is so critically important. If you build people buy from people, and people stay with people based on that relationship that they have. If you build a good rapport with these owners, they're going to and they trust you and they like you, they're going to maybe overlook those little issues. Maybe if revenue's down slightly, maybe if there's a little bit more damage, you know what I mean? They're going to give you a little bit more leeway, and you're definitely going to reduce your churn. So again, I cannot believe more people don't do this. They're not actually doing that proactive relationship building, because it does make a difference. I mean, I'm sure you all know it. Like when you have that relationship with an owner, a tight relationship, if something does go wrong, they're going to be much less likely to churn. And then one thing we did, we always had like, at least I would always pick, I kind of had our core, as we grew and we were pretty big, I had those core owners that I would definitely touch base with. I had a tickler on my calendar at least every quarter to touch base with, just to kind of, like you said, JJ, just chat, just see how things are going, see how their families are doing. And then another thing we always did in kind of a macro level across the board was we always sent an NPS survey at the end of the season. And the idea was, I didn't want somebody just canceling. I didn't want just somebody canceling without knowing about it. I wanted to get, if they had issues or they had a problem, I wanted to know about it in advance so I could, address it and talk to them about it and fix it before, they just, sent me the cancellation notice. So those are kind of the two things that we did.
Yeah. The comment I really resonate there with JJ, and it's something that I'm continually working on my side, is we do a lot of things that you don't see. So just, I've told this to on my side, I call a client success team, which is just gathering all those things regularly. And they're just telling them like, hey, by the way, like this link went live, this thing happened here, we made these bid adjustments, whatever. And we'll end a lot of those sometimes with like, no action needed, just letting you know that like these things are going on basically. And the more we send those, like I've kind of told my client success team, I don't think we can overdo this. Like, I think it's gonna be really hard to overdo this, where they're like, oh no, stop, don't keep giving us updates. Like, if that happens, I'll gladly pull back, and we'll slow it down a little bit. But I think if anything, the opposite tends to be what we fall into, which is like, hey, we're doing this stuff, right? Like, we agreed we're doing this, but if we don't tell them about it, it's like if a tree falls in the forest and no one's around, does it actually make a sound? That's kind of been the vibe that I've given to my team. So that comment, JJ, I think really resonates with me, and I think it reminds me of that great Rob quote that Brooke, you and I brought up a lot on this podcast. In the absence of information, people are going to assume the worst, and at the absence of information from their property manager, they're going to think these guys are sitting on the beach in Cocoa Beach doing nothing, chilling, not doing anything. But if you just tell them, like, here's what we did in the website, we did this, we did this, we did this. To your point, maybe the performance isn't amazing, but they go, those guys are trying. They're putting their effort in, and there's things obviously right now happening outside of everybody's control. That might be impacting demand. So.
I think Lino Maldonado with Scenic Stays, and I think Jason Sprinkle said the same thing. You can never over communicate with owners.
Yeah, if it happens, like I said, I'll tell my team to chill down, slow down. But until I get like a feedback from a client who's like, oh no, please stop sending us updates, I'm gonna hit the gas pedal on our side, and I think it's made a meaningful difference as well. So, number 9, JJ, maybe it's a quick one because we kind of talked about this earlier, but not taking on any and every property. And as you've grown, you learned which property and which type of owner as well to say best for the business. Last time we talked more maybe about the owner persona, getting the bad vibes, bad energy, that sort of thing. But do you have other criteria in place? Maybe that's how I can talk about this one a little bit. Like, for example, do you have a service area and you won't go outside that service area anymore? Maybe you were at first. So any other like property selection criteria that you've learned over the past few years?
Yeah, definitely. We're trying to take inventory where we've got other properties, right? So if you take something that's 45 minutes away, then that's just harder for everybody because you got to have different cleaning team, different if you've got to go run something out to a guest, that sort of thing. So definitely a proximity type of thing that we're taking into account, and then also the trying to think of the right word, the niceness level of the property, right? So really
Fit
trying
and finish, maybe quality.
Yeah, the quality, exactly. Normally the lower quality properties end up having more problems, and so trying to have this baseline of higher quality has reduced problems, increased guest satisfaction. So because it's easy, unfortunately, in our industry, it's easy to oversell a property. It photographs nicely, the description sounds great, and then people get there and are disappointed if it is a low quality property. And so it's a lot easier just to not have those.
Yeah, I think in the beginning, like everyone does this, JJ, I'm sure you all did the same thing. In the beginning, you take on any property you can get. You will take on that dog property.
Yeah.
Just because you have to. You got to, you don't have to, but it's that you got to generate some revenue.
You're trying to build up the legitimacy, trying to have some other owners that can vouch for you, that sort of thing. So anybody that'll give you an opportunity, you're like, yes.
Yeah, exactly. And but what we found once we got to a couple hundred properties under management, then we really narrowed down, kind of like you were talking about. We focused on like 5 or 6 buildings and really did all of our, Ocean City is a 9-mile sandbar with 20,000 condos in it. And there's just, hundreds and hundreds of condo buildings. And, 80% of them are not the greatest. So we really just focused on 5 or 6 buildings, and, that changed our business dramatically once we did that.
Yeah. This isn't common, JJ, but I had a client a little while ago who since sold to Vacasa, but his kind of logic was 50 units or within some reasonable range of that. So what he would do is over time, he'd get like a home or a townhome and he'd kick out a condo in his market. That was kind of like his goal, was to shift over time away from condos and townhomes into, into a larger, individual single family homes, that sort of thing. So he had more of like this, I know what I can handle and I'm just going to keep upping my quality over time. And when he sold to Vacasa, his revenue had tripled, even though he actually had roughly the same amount of inventory because the quality of his home, homes and properties have gone up a lot. So just, I've seen different ways of approaching it, but I think the way you describe it is pretty sound as well. So, bringing us home here, number 10. And then I think Brooke's gonna have one more question to bring us to a full close here, but I'll get to number 10 here. Lack of expectation setting and accountability. So not all employees and vendors have the same vision as you, meaning on the property management side. And many times you handed over a task, a project, and you were then disappointed in the outcome. So what's kind of your process today of setting the right expectations and accountability with someone you're working with, maybe whether it's a team member, vendor, whatever the case may be, and then making sure that vision is seen all the way through?
Yeah. Some things, I think we were kind of talking about this before we started. I think some things, unfortunately, you have to do yourself as a business owner, even if you don't want to do them. And it primarily goes towards like the setting a process for something. And so instead of just saying, for instance, hey, I want to start sending out guest marketing emails, and then you hire a marketing person, to your point, and say, go send out emails. Probably better off, if you know how to do it, to write out a process and say, here's how you do an email. Here's what I want in the email. Here's the metrics that we're going to be tracking for the email to know if it's successful, right? And so that's kind of my point on expectation and accountability. And to the same point with vendors, I am working with a new vendor, and I told them exactly what I was hoping out of the campaign that we're running. I said, here's the metrics that I'm going to see if this is a successful campaign or not. If it doesn't meet these metrics, then there's not going to be a surprise afterwards, because we've already said this in the beginning of, here's what we think is going to be, here's our break even point, and here's where we need to be. So I think sometimes again, it kind of goes back to those hard conversations, and it might make you sound like a jerk and setting those expectations up front, but at the same time, then it just, there's no um, undiscussed things, right? There's no gray area. It's white or black. Here's it was done or it was not done. And so yeah, that's been something that I've kind of learned over the past couple of years, because some people have a different expectation of what success looks like, and just making sure that everybody's aligned on that.
I like that, right? It's the defining the definition of success, right? Like, especially with like even a vendor or an employee, just like, hey, this is what we're looking for. This is what success looks like. So we're all under the same right expectations, and that's what we're going to go for. Or what happens is they say, you know what? Like Conrad, if someone came to you and said, hey, we're expecting to go, from, 5% direct bookings to 80% direct bookings in the next 3 months, you would kind of push back on them, you know what I mean, to make sure you're all aligned, because otherwise you're not going to be successful, and it's going to end miserably, that relationship.
Yeah. I've had it happen before as well, where we try to ask those questions early on, and you kind of root out someone who doesn't really know. And sometimes it's just educating them. So like they have an unreasonable expectation. And like, JJ, you're a very reasonable person. So I suspect there, but maybe you're wading into things from time to time that you're just not as knowledgeable about, something new. And then that person, if they're talented and experienced, can educate you a little bit and be like, well, typically like the average open rate on these emails is 25 to 35%. So if you say it's a failure, if it's less than a 50% open rate on this email, I think you're setting yourself up for failure. I think anyone promising you that is probably going to be, blowing some sunshine up your tail, and saying that it's possible when it's most likely not the case, right? So I think that's part of it too. When you're working with a solid vendor or a solid, partner in any way, they're honest with you too, and they're saying like, here's what you can expect. Is there some that maybe are a little bit above that? Sure, but it's not very common. So I think that's kind of the process there.
Well, we actually, and JJ, we just built a revised version of this. You would appreciate this. We built out an expectations calculator, online version. So and we actually go over it now in sales. And the idea was we were signing up people and they had completely false expectations. Unfortunately, they read my book From Zero to 500 Properties in 5 years, and they thought they could do that in 1 year or 2 years. And so we want to set it. And look, a lot of it depends on their brand. A lot of it depends on how competitive the market is. I mean, you can't expect to be a brand new company and scale, unless you're JJ King. You can't expect to scale that kind of rapid growth. So that expectations calculator and doing that in the sales process for us has been super beneficial. It probably slowed the velocity of sales. We probably lost a couple of sales, but in the end, we're in alignment when people are signing on.
Right on. Well, Brooke, I think one more question before we let JJ go.
Yeah, well, JJ, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it. It's always good seeing you and seeing how successful you guys have been. So, but yeah, if you could go back in time and ask your 25-year-old self, give some advice, what would it be?
Yeah. So I would say that imposter syndrome is definitely a real thing, and I still struggle with it, but I definitely struggled with it back when I was 25. And the Steve Jobs quote has always resonated with me. This is one of your favorite quotes too, Brooke. I always remembered you talking about this, but everything around you that you call life was made up by people that were no smarter than you, and you can change it, you can influence it, and you can build your own things that other people can use.
I love Love that quote. You've heard me say that many times, so I appreciate you saying that. Yeah, it's you see some of these. I've been lucky to see some people that have built some incredible companies, had some, multi-$100 million plus exits. And in the grand scheme of things, these people are no smarter than me, So it's just sometimes about having the right idea at the right time and assembling the right team. So I'm glad you brought up that quote. Thank you. So, Conrad, you want to take us home?
Absolutely. One thing that doesn't take a lot of smarts, but will help us out a lot is leaving us a podcast review. So go to your, podcast app of choice, iTunes, Spotify. That's where we get the most downloads. We appreciate a review there the most. Leave us 5 stars, and we're going to convince more awesome guests like JJ to come down in the future. So thanks so much. We appreciate it. Everyone have an awesome rest of your day.